Horror and thriller games have taken the world by storm, and there is a large number of people who willingly play terrifying games that send a shiver down their spine. The intense suspense and fear inherent in these games are what makes them worth playing, and apart from a good storyline, creepy background music and dark visuals, it is the terrifying characters that truly add to the fear. Over the years, game designers have come up with various horror characters to scare players and fans in games like Dead Space and Silent Hill. Here is a rundown of the 15 most terrifying fight game characters that have chilling backstories. Before we go into our explanations, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Pyramid Head, Silent Hill. Anyone who plays horror games is familiar with Pyramid Head, one of the most iconic Silent Hill antagonists. Pyramid Head is also known by the names Red Pyramid Thing, Red Pyramid, Bogeyman, and Sankaku Atama in Japan. He's the antagonist and stalks James Sunderland, the main player character, who travels to the town of Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his late wife, Mary, who was first introduced in the 2001 film Silent Hill 2. He is best known for his striking appearance and having a pyramid for a head. The team behind Silent Hill 2's base plotline, which included game director, art director Masahiro Ito, Masashi Tsuboyama, scenario writer Hiroyuki Owaku, character designer Tayayoshi Sato, and drama director Suguru Murakoshi, decided that they required a chaser monster to play a specific function in the plot. Ito planned for the monster to serve as a metaphor for James Sunderland's story arc and quest because they are subconscious representations of the protagonist rather than pre-existing beings native to the town. They wanted a monster with a disguised face for the chaser Pyramid Head so that it would look less human and more unsettling, thus leading to the creation of this creature with a pyramid in place of a head. His iconic butcher's clothing and crimson helmet are reminiscent of the town's former executioners, who revered Valtiel, the angel of rebirth. He exists to keep James Sunderland human and aid in his recollection of his prior deeds as a representation of his shame and need for retribution. According to Masahiro Ito, Pyramid Head is the one entity that takes the shape of Valtiel's reason for existing. In other words, the idolatrous beliefs of the villagers were the source of Pyramid Head and the being's existence. The idea is that the town of Silent Hill, Maine, is surrounded by a paranormal force that has the capacity to make the ideas of unconscious minds manifest. According to the lore, Native Americans employed this in the town's early days to appear to interact with both nature and their deceased relatives. Eventually, European settlers took away their territory from them. Due to the town's influence, a mystery cult emerged and eventually took over most of its infrastructure. Valtiel, an angel of rebirth and a being near to God who has manifested in a variety of forms throughout the town's history, is one of the deities they worship. The cult started carrying out ceremonial executions while dressing like him and donning crimson hoods. It was during his trip to Silent Hill with his wife before the events of Silent Hill 2 that he had seen pictures of these hooded people, and one in particular looked eerily like a pyramid head. When he returned after the death of his wife, that image stayed with him and manifested in the form of the deadly and horrifying Pyramid Head. Dividers, Dead Space. The tall, slender necromorphs known as Dividers feature on this list because not only are they terrifying to look at, but they also have the unusual ability to fragment into smaller monsters. In Dead Space 2, and in theory Dead Space 3, they are encountered by the main protagonist or player, Isaac. However, this horrifying creature is not just a monster without a purpose. It actually had a dark and disturbing backstory. According to the shreds of grey attire that cling onto its gaunt and Slender Man-esque body, the Divider in the first Dead Space is made up of deceased senior officials of the USG Ishimura, since the officers also wore similar coats. The ones seen on the Titan station, however, were developed by scientists dressed in white lab clothes, showing that these poor scientists were not spared by their creations. As far as looks are concerned, the Divider is a gangly, sinewy creature with remnants of human physiology. The majority of their skin tissue had fallen out or been digested, along with their primary organs being practically absent. This could either be because they got stretched along with the rest of the body tissue, or they fell out when the tissue got stretched. Their fingers have fused together into lengthy claws, and the limbs have grown incredibly slender and elongated in comparison to a regular human being. Only enough muscle is left to keep the necromorph together after the majority of it has fallen off. The abdomen of a Divider thus is left uncovered, which creates a sizable hole in the body as a result of the absence of the primary organs. Despite this, the Divider is an incredibly loud creature, releasing high-pitched shrieks when agitated and deep whale-like bellows while at rest. The Divider prefers to suffocate its victims with its long tongue from a distance, if at all feasible, but it will also slash them to death with its arms and long tongue. After the host body has been destroyed, the arms and legs can move independently thanks to the mutation. The primary necromorph is the head of the creature, and all the appendages are secondary creatures that can separate from the main torso. The head uses its arms and legs to distract the victim as they climb and leap on various surfaces. When the victim is vulnerable, the head sneaks up and finally uses its strong arms and legs to decapitate the victim's head from the rest of the victim's body and hijack it with its arms, seizing control of the host's nervous system, most likely by connecting itself to the spine, creating another Divider. Valtiel, Silent Hill 3. Valtiel is a central entity in the Silent Hill lore, and by extension, the games. He's a demonic appearance in Silent Hill 3, which is hideous enough to shock the player or make them flinch. However, despite looking like another one of the town's horrendous creations, Valtiel has some key features that sets him apart from the rest. The main difference is that Valtiel doesn't seem to be a projection of anyone's emotion or subconscious, in contrast to most monsters in this series. He might be a special being from the other world, existing there apart from people and working directly for God. His name also loosely translates to Attendant of God, which is a title given to theological angels. Although Valtiel appears to be humanoid, his head shakes and jerks quickly, hiding his facial characteristics. He has a series of shoddy stitches where his mouth ought to be, and his face is blank and leathery. Like Glutton or Closer, two other antagonistic creatures in Silent Hill, his head features an item like a mouth on the back and a ear on the left side. He wears gloves and is dressed in ceremonial garments that resemble butcher's aprons. He appears to have blood on his hands and other portions of his body. Further, the seal of Metatron is worn by Valtiel on both shoulders. Valtiel is believed to be a servant of another powerful supernatural force on Silent Hill due to his servant designation and passive role in the game. Valtiel is a saintly being comparable to an angel, possibly Metatron, according to the long-standing Silent Hill tradition. Valtiel was one of the supernatural beings purported to have been created by God in Silent Hill to influence people to follow her. Jimmy Stone established the Valtiel sect, a unique sect created in Valtiel's honor. This angel is praised in it as a way to get closer to God. In Silent Hill 3, Valtiel watches Heather as God's attendant to assure the birth of God. His surgical-inspired attire, which includes a mask, smock, and gloves, represents his duty as a midwife, where he assists in the birth of the reincarnated God. This is a very new topic in Silent Hill 3, which centers on motherhood as seen by Heather's role as God's mother. Lisa, Silent Hill. With Silent Hill being a massive horror game series, it is not a surprise that yet another Silent Hill character features on this list. This particular character, named Lisa, appears in the Silent Hill playable teaser. In 2014, it was made available as a free download for the PlayStation 4. It is not technically a Silent Hill game, yet it is tied to the franchise. Although this was kept a secret until the end of the teaser, the game was meant to be a demo for the since cancelled Silent Hills. Lisa is extremely unsettling to look at. She is abnormally tall and slender, and it looks like her right eye is absent. Her brown, short hair is curly. She is dressed in a long grey nightgown that is mostly smeared with blood on her lower torso. She has bloody feet and has one red high-heeled shoe on her right foot while her left foot is naked. She also makes noises that resemble frantic laughing and sobbing, which will literally send a chill down your spine. Lisa is a ghost of a woman who was tragically killed by her husband. Her husband shot her in the right eye and the stomach while she was pregnant, killing her in cold blood with a rifle. This brutal act is reflected in her appearance as her dress is bloodied near her stomach. And we also see something resembling a bloody fetus in the bathroom. Her entire backstory is tragic and terrifying at the same time, given that her husband claimed to have a monster inside of him and asked for her forgiveness. It appears from a message in the game that he regretted killing her. It's possible that he ended his life after killing her. Because she is a ghost after all, she can possess the player and take control of them. This can happen if the player approaches her too closely, at which time she will charge at them. The player will hear Lisa breathing behind the protagonist when Lisa is in control of them, and they will also hear a third footstep. On occasion, Lisa will viciously assault the protagonist if they turn around when they were possessed. She will occasionally show up behind the player and jump violently. Her pained cries will be audible in the background during these appearances. However, they will sound distorted as though they are coming from a speaker. Being possessed by Lisa is a truly terrifying ordeal.
How dare you kill my sister! You'll pay for it! I'll make mincemeat out of you!
The Scissorman, Clock Tower. Think Edward Scissorhands, but a far more scary, lethal and psychotic one. The character Scissorman refers to the names of numerous antagonists from the Clock Tower series. In the series, there are several Scissormen and even Scissorwomen. The main character is pursued by these horrific serial killers who are often unstoppable and untouchable. According to the Japanese novelization of Clock Tower, the Scissorman was considered to be the son of the Great Father in the demonic cult led by Theodore Barrows, an ancestor of the Barrows family. Every few generations, there would be born into the household with the sole intention of presenting infants to the Great Father as sacrifices. According to the second game of the Clock Tower series, the first Scissorman was one known as Little John, who lived a long time ago. His father, Quentin Barrows, had intervened to prevent him from killing anyone, and in-game he can be found buried in a stone coffin in the Barrows castle. A young man named Bobby Barrows, who was the son of Mary and Simon Barrows and the twin brother of Dan Barrows, is introduced as Scissorman in the first game. He continuously pursues Jennifer Simpson across the Barrows mansion in an effort to murder her. He can be seen dancing briefly if he knocks Jennifer to the ground, suggesting that he enjoys toying with his victims before killing them. Bobby's eyes are entirely white in the opening cinematic of the second game, and it is revealed that his mother Mary was a member of a cult, both of which strongly suggest that he is a demon. Scissorman makes a comeback in the second Clock Tower film, sporting a blue overcoat, a mask, and an excessive limp. According to the decisions the player makes during the game, it is revealed that the Scissorman in this particular game might be an assortment of individuals such as Harris Chapman or Samuel Barton. But whoever the fictitious Scissorman in this game turns out to be, Edward, the only other survivor of the original Clock Tower killings aside from Jennifer, is always the true Scissorman. In the end, Edward's true identity is revealed to be Dan Barrows, the brother of Bobby Barrows. Last but not least, Scissorman Ralph also makes an appearance in Clock Tower 3. He is not, however, linked to any of the Scissorman's earlier incarnations. He has a sister named Scissorwoman, Jemima, as well, and they both have a pair of long knives that may be combined to form improvised scissors. They were servants to Lord Burroughs and served as his torturers and executioners. However, they were stoned to death by neighborhood peasants in vengeance after Burroughs' death. Nevertheless, both were revived and shared a single entity. Alma Wade, F-E-A-R, Fear. Alma Wade, the primary antagonist of the Fear series, has a horrible and gut-wrenching backstory. She was born to Harlan Wade and his wife Elizabeth Wade on August 26, 1979. Alma's mother passed away during delivery, giving her father sole custody of Alma. For some reason, Alma was blessed or cursed, depending on the way you look at it, with extraordinary psychic abilities. As a result, she had nightmares and was sensitive to the adverse feelings of others around her. Her father quickly realized that Alma was special, and he began involving her in experiments from when she was only 3 years old. Alma was then accepted by Armacham into Project Paragon, where she was put through a series of tests to see what kind of psychic abilities she possessed. She was subjected to a barrage of tests to determine the origin of her abilities and how they reacted to environmental factors. Alma started purposefully failing Armacham's tests when she was 5 years old to get the business to cease using her in experiments. Later, she started a fire in a lab at the Project Origin facility and started psychically attacking the Armacham researchers who were testing her. Her victims started to experience intense nightmares, abrupt mood swings, and delusions. Seeing this, Armacham devised a scheme to keep Alma alive while preventing her from attacking their workers psychically by having her sedated. At the age of 7, Alma was enlisted in Project Origin, a program run by Armacham Technology Corporation that aimed to produce psychic people from psychic progenitors. In 1987, 2 days before her 8th birthday, she was placed into an induced coma and imprisoned in a spherical building called the Vault, which rendered her psychic powers useless. Throughout the course of the project, Alma was twice impregnated with prototypes made from a combination of her own DNA and the DNA of the Origin researchers, including Harlan Wade, her own father. When she was just 15 years old, she gave birth to the first prototype, a being called the Point Man, and a second, Paxton Fettel, a year later. When Fettel was 10, Alma eventually integrated her consciousness with his, triggering the first synchronicity event, forcing ATC to terminate Project Origin and pull the plug on Alma. When the Vault's life support was turned off, when Alma was 26 years old, ATC assumed she had passed away. Her physical body passed away 6 days after her life support was removed, according to Harlan Wade. However, Fear 2, Project Origin, claims that her psychic energy persisted long after her heart stopped, fed by the anger of a furious, seething spirit. She was still confined inside the vault with her corpse, so for 20 years she primarily remained dormant. People began to feel nervous or ill around her corpse during this time, and soon the region of the city was deserted. Employees at Armacham shut off the location where Alma's body was kept because they were terrified of her abilities, and they wouldn't reopen it until 20 years had gone by. Hence, it is safe to say that this tortured little girl spirit inspired fear in the hearts of many.
That is really, really funny, huh?
Vaas, Far Cry. Vaas Montenegro is probably one of the most famous characters from the Far Cry video game series by Ubisoft. In the 2012 video game Far Cry 3, he makes an early game antagonist appearance and is heavily highlighted in the game's advertising. Vaas is portrayed as a temperamental and psychologically unstable figure who troubles Jason Brody, the protagonist of Far Cry 3, and also acts as a negative psychological mirror for him. Vaas was born in 1984 on the Rook Islands, and from an early age he was a part of the native Rakyat. He was very close to his sister Citra and stated that the first time he murdered a person was for her. Vaas had been profoundly in love with his sister since he was a young boy, almost to the point of madness. He would use aggression against anyone who won her attention, such as beating up a man who he discovered being in bed with his sister. Vaas struggled internally and fell apart since he was unable to express his feelings to his sister. Before 2012, Hoyt Volker, a psychotic slave trader and drug trafficker, smuggled drugs to the islands, where Vaas later developed a major drug addiction. Vaas ultimately made contact with Volker, who recognized his ability and elevated him to the position of right-hand man. After killing their previous leader in cold blood, Vaas rose to become the head of the Pirates, a group of pirates that was a faction in Hoyt's gang, and travelled to the Rook Islands to rape, plunder, steal and murder. Nothing was too grisly or too heinous for them. Anything and everything was allowed. Vaas also attempted to seize control of the island by inciting a revolt against Hoyt. Vaas and his troops would aid Volker in his operations, including cultivating marijuana fields and selling the island's natives as slaves. They would also create panic and injustice among the Rakyat. Vaas would run his operations out of a covert castle on the North Island, from which he would watch over the murders and destruction he inflicted on the indigenous and the Rakyat, who were previously considered his family. He is evidently a deranged and psychotic killer whose hedonism knows no bounds. In 2021, Vaas Insanity, the first DLC for Far Cry 6, featured his video game comeback. Vaas is the main character in this DLC, and the player can see inside his deranged head, an experience that is definitely for the strong-willed. Pious Augustus, Eternal Darkness. The late 20s Roman centurion Pious Augustus is shown fighting in ancient Persia in Eternal Darkness. He first appears in Chapter 1, The Chosen One, as the playable character before succumbing to darkness and becoming the game's main antagonist. His playable chapter takes place in 26 BC, and in it, Pious and his allies reflect on the victory of their prior conflicts. One of the troops compliments Pious' tactics on the battlefield, while another wonders about an artifact that the emperor entrusted Pious with locating. Pious answers with assurance. Pious hears voices chanting his name as the soldiers commence their search. The voices take him to numerous bizarre spires in the desert, where he enters the Forbidden City, an old temple. Before discovering 3 potent relics that stand in for the 3 ancients, he battles his way through several Mantorok zombies and destroys a statue of himself. Pious then becomes a potent lich by selecting one of the 3 objects and consequently one of the 3 ancients. Pious boasts about his newly acquired power and warns others not to challenge him, since they will undoubtedly die at his hands by the end of his chapter. This begins his spiral into an antagonistic character. He becomes a servant of the ancients, and while he likes to assign labor to summoned dominions, Pious actively participates in preventing the hero's activities. He is not afraid to get his hands dirty. Before becoming a missionary to an ancient, Pious Augustus was described as a very talented centurion who had defeated an adversary in Persia with presumably minimal deaths on the part of the Romans. He was also shown to be effective in slaying his enemies when brought to the Forbidden City. The fact that he is the only character in the game who is untouched by the sanity-drained Mantorok's zombies inflict on every other character, probably as a result of his status as a career soldier, further demonstrates his lack of fear. After becoming a missionary of an ancient, his powers increased tremendously, enabling him to use the magic fueled by that ancient, including a potent summoning spell, and to control all of that ancient's armies. This made him a terrifying antagonist. Further, he is also able to disguise himself, not just as other humans, but also as a ghost, which makes playing and winning against him extremely tough.
I love you, but I need to know that you're safe. So please, just...
Ethan, you insolent...
Mother Miranda, Resident Evil. In a rural mountain community in Eastern Europe, Miranda was born sometime in the late 19th century. She gave birth to Eva, her first and only child, in 1909. The Spanish flu arrived in the town in 1919 and decimated its populace. Her daughter Eva, who was just 10 years old at the time of her death, was one of the many people who perished in this epidemic, and the death toll was so high that the cemetery quickly became completely full. Heartbroken and devastated, she wanted to end her life, but she was about to experience an unexpected change in her life. The neighboring cave where she had gone to commit suicide was where she later discovered and contracted the mold. This mold turned out to be the best thing to happen to her in a long time. As a result of the infection, she gained great knowledge and superhuman abilities. She pioneered research on this unknown fungus and used it to carry out experiments on nearby villages throughout the following century, seeking to discover the ideal vessel to resurrect her daughter. Although Miranda's life before the birth of her daughter isn't as widely known, several records and environmental cues indicate that she was essentially a priestess who occasionally served as the area's equivalent of a doctor. After gaining powers from the black mold, she became a biologist as well. After returning from the cave, Miranda infected a number of people with the mold, curing them of their ailments, and soon after presenting sermons at the neighborhood church. She leveraged the apparent miracles to declare himself a prophet of the Black God. The mold's mental alterations caused the villagers to rapidly give up their Christian religion and join Miranda's new pagan cult, referring to her as Mother going forward. Thus, Mother Miranda served as a central plot point in the game and also showed off a whole host of abilities. Her final form is even scarier as she practically turns into a black-winged monster. She also kidnapped Rosemary Winters as a baby in February 2021 for this reason, and when she saw there was no more use for the villagers, she conducted a genocide by releasing lichens on them. Ethan Winters, the father of Rose, who had become involved in a BSAA operation to stop the pandemic, was eventually responsible for killing Miranda and putting a stop to her deranged experiments. Slender Man, Slender, The 8 Pages. The first-person survival horror video game, Slender, The 8 Pages, was created independently and launched as a beta in June 2012 for Microsoft Windows and OS X by Parsec Productions. Slender, The 8 Pages is a first-person game that takes place in the middle of the night in a forested area. The player's goal is to gather all 8 of the notes that are scattered across the forest while avoiding the Slender Man. The Slender Man is a semi-folklore character portrayed as a tall humanoid with a white face and no facial characteristics, who wears a black suit and tie in the game, which was created by Mark J. Hadley. The persona is notorious for the sinister kidnapping of numerous kids in frightening places like deep woodlands and deserted buildings. He is a mythical being with hazily defined traits and skills. Create Paranormal Images on the Something Awful forum is where Slender Man was first referenced. He typically presents himself as a tall humanoid wearing a white shirt, a red or black tie, and usually a black suit. His entire face is colorless or white and devoid of any facial features. Although his fingers are longer and bonier than those of an average person, he has no hair and normally appears to have normal-looking bare hands. Depending on the circumstance, Slender Man has been portrayed in images and literature as standing anywhere between 6 and 15 feet tall, while in videos he is typically only about 6 to 7 feet tall. He exhibits behavior that could be described as passive-aggressive, frequently stalking prey for years before finally assaulting them. It is known that he frequently subjects his victims to prolonged mental torment, inducing insanity in them with terror and paranoia. Nobody has ever provided a convincing justification for his methods or how he selects his victims, and his goals and/or reasons have yet to be fully determined. He is rarely shown in a positive or benign aspect and is typically perceived as an evil entity. He is thus known as a malevolent entity that drives his victims crazy out of sheer paranoia. An aura of mystery surrounds Slender Man. Although he has a human appearance, he does not behave like one. It is unclear whether he is a social creature, comprehends human behaviors or languages, or even why people seem to be his main targets. In some instances, he appears to be capable of possessing his prey. Just seeing Slender Man incites terror. This is partly because of his intimidating height and other unsettling physical characteristics, and partly because of his nearly entirely alien appearance. Jason Voorhees, Friday the 13th. The primary adversary and playable character in Friday the 13th, the game, is Jason Voorhees. He perished in the water after drowning as a boy, but no one bothered to help him or look for him. Even the police, who are supposed to be responsible during tragic events like this, paid no heed. However, evil does not usually stay dead for too long, and he too comes right back. In retaliation for the loss of his mother, he stalks and kills anybody who trespasses along Camp Crystal Lake, and the player can hear his mother's voice in his head, ordering him to stop trespassers. All but one of his various gaming forms are based on his movie personas. Each Jason also has a special weapon, a certain number of constructed bear traps, and the ability to find throwing knives throughout the game. He is mainly depicted with his signature Jason mask and weapons such as shovels and sledgehammers, keeping in line with the films. His stalking and killing tactic easily inspires fear, so it is definitely a good thing that the player plays as Jason and is not the only one being hunted down by this mentally ill psychopath. The 5 powers Jason possesses are the same regardless of which version is chosen, albeit some are more or less powerful in comparison to others. Part 7, for instance, Jason's sense cooldown is quicker while his shift cooldown is slower. Over time, skills become available one by one. Rage. On top of his strength and endurance, Jason has a passive power called Rage that boosts his other talents and gives him the ability to rapidly break through select walls and doors. This power automatically activates about halfway through the game. Sense. Jason receives a visual clue when noises are made nearby. Morph. Jason can teleport to a location on the map by using the ability to morph. Stalk. Threatening music that counselors hear while Jason is nearby is turned off with the stalk power. It amplifies the noise made by the counselors while somewhat muting the background noise Jason may hear. Shift. Jason can shift into first person and travel quickly, enabling him to avoid traps and more easily catch up to the counselors. Serial killers are always spine-chilling. Laura, the Evil Within. A recurrent foe in The Evil Within, and shortly in The Evil Within 2, is a distorted replica of Laura Victoriano. Laura is being created out of Ruvik's own wrath and the memory of Laura's awful death. The entire existence of this entity is a reference to the barn house fire that severely damaged Laura and left her in a vegetative condition that ultimately caused her death. She is almost impervious to bullets but responds violently to open flames. In the game, she walks on all fours in a terrifying, exorcist-esque manner and has long, sharp nails which she uses to practically tear off human flesh of live humans that fall victim to her. She further has long black hair that shrouds her face almost completely. Laura's resurrected form also has spotty, mottled skin, probably as a result of the fire. The fact that she screams non-stop could be a result of Ruvik's last memory of Laura howling in agony as she was being burned. The player must continually be moving because Laura walks slowly but can teleport small distances to keep up with Sebastian. She can sometimes be temporarily slowed down by closing shutter doors or other similar items in various situations. Although she favors corpses that are close to Sebastian, Laura can spawn from any corpse that is lying on the ground. In fact, she can even spawn from pools of blood, making her a terribly unpredictable enemy. Fighting Laura will almost always be fatal, especially considering the game's relatively meager resource allocation. Although Laura herself may be defeated using standard weapons, her enormous health combined with the fact that she frequently teleports away when attacked makes her a significant resource drain. Coming into direct contact with Laura always results in instant death, as she will rip the player's character apart with no space or time for mercy or retaliation. This character probably has one of the most brutal killing tactics, and for fans who watched it for the first time on screen, let's just say many of them did not sleep well at night. The Gatherers, Amnesia, The Dark Descent. The main adversaries in Amnesia, The Dark Descent are the Gatherers, who serve Alexander of Brennenburg. The Grunt and the Brute are two distinct types of gatherers. They move around Brennenburg Castle on patrol, attacking Daniel when they spot him. The origins of these servants are suggested by a note discovered in the castle. Originally, these animals were soldiers who strayed from their posts and were stranded in the woods close to Castle Brennenburg. Alexander used poisoned wine which caused the drinker to brutally burst from the inside, as we can see in the room in the wine cellar where Wilhelm leaves his message, and it is strongly indicated that this is the source of their deformities. Since they are still alive and not dead like the remainder of Alexander's tests, it is impossible to know for sure whether they have been emptied of vitae, despite their apparent lack of essence. These creatures may have been his subordinates since the early 17th century CE, seizing live victims for Alexander's experiments, assuming that Alexander had something to do with their metamorphosis from men into monsters. As far as their in-game appearance is concerned, they cannot be killed because Daniel is unarmed. As a result, they must be evaded by running, hiding in closets, or hiding behind items so as not to be spotted. When approaching Daniel's immediate region, the gatherers will always growl audibly to let the player know they are there. Daniel's sanity will deteriorate as he encounters these monsters. Therefore, it is preferable to avoid making eye contact with them directly. The gatherers typically don't stay for very long, and the inquiries are frequently superficial. These adversaries will pose a greater threat if the game is played in hard mode, since they will move faster, deal more damage with their attacks, have better vision to detect the player, and remain in the searching stage for a longer period of time. Additionally, there won't be any danger music to let you know when they have left. In this scenario, losing too much sanity results in the player's death, making it even more crucial to avoid gazing at opponents. Red Chomper, Dark Wood. In the game Dark Wood, Red Chompers are hostile, dangerous monsters. They resemble those who have undergone the ultimate stage of the plague because their heads have been severed from their chests down, producing a wide mouth with many teeth. Red Chompers frequently roam the old woods and can be encountered at a few predetermined areas in the Silent Forest, such as the Broken Truck. They also show up regularly in the swamp. During the night phase, they have a good possibility of spawning close to the old woods hideout to attack the protagonist. These terrifying animals strike at first sight and bite the main character for half a pip. The illusory Black Chompers are often replaced with the weaker Red Chompers in the game. Black Chompers are fiercely hostile animals and far more dangerous than their red counterparts. They assault the player during the prologue and dream scenes. If the player tampers with the radio in the basement of the epilogue, one Black Chomper will also appear behind a closed door, although it won't be able to harm them. They are inky, smoky carnivores that are completely black. They are the stronger and more aggressive variation of the Red Chomper and attack on sight. The Black Chomper's iconography is similar to that of the Red Chomper, but it is black and emits dark tendrils instead of red. Twin Victim. Last but not least, we have the terrifying Twin Victim, the terrifying adversary from Silent Hill 4, The Room. The Twin Victim, also known as Doublehead, is first met in the water prison. The monster has the appearance of a gigantic pair of conjoined twin children sleeping side by side, dressed in a ragged, filthy smock and what appears to be a scarf, both of which have a feathery texture. They have pale skin and huge adult-like arms that they stand on. As though they were a pair of legs, their arms protrude from beneath their smock. Brian and Miriam Locane, twins who were initially referenced in Silent Hill 2, are Walter Sullivan's 7th and 8th victims. They are now known as the Twin Victims, as they are the only two of Walter's victims that have returned as monsters rather than as ghosts. It seems sensible for the monsters to have originated in this way, but it is unclear why there are so many of them. But a possible later meaning could be able to explain this. Essentially conjoined twins, the twin victims are created when a fertilized cell fails to properly divide, fusing the two together. The game's primary theme is Walter's deranged amount of devotion to and misinterpretation of his mother, which is gradually revealed throughout gameplay. Another possible expression of this intense devotion is the twin victims. The twin victims sound more like toddlers in the main menu opening trailer, and their high-pitched cries are more audible. However, deep, low growls took the place of this cry in the actual game. They are also one of the only monsters that can speak in their monstrous forms. Notably, the twin victim was designed by Masaya Okada and is Masahiro Ito's favorite Silent Hill monster. Horror games allow the player to delve deep into an unknown world, one that they don't encounter in everyday life. It allows horror fans to experience things that most people never experience in their day-to-day. Having scary creatures such as Mother Miranda and the twin victims simply adds to the overall horrific experience. Further, interesting and detailed backstories make the fear very real for the player. Do you know of any other horror game characters that should make it to the top 15 list? Tell us in the comment section below.